I was 18, trapped in a truck with a man who treated me like subhuman garbage, a man who thought my father leaving was the punchline to a joke. He thought he was untouchable because he was the boss. He didn't realize that when you push a quiet person to their limit, they don't just snap. They get creative. And by the time Gary realized what was happening, he was screaming for his life in a cloud of his own terror. If you've ever been stuck under the thumb of a toxic boss and dreamed of the perfect payback, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Today, we're diving into a story where the bully finally gets exactly what he deserves. Let's get into it. The air in northern Alberta has a specific scent in the early 2000s. It's a mix of diesel exhaust, raw earth, and the metallic tang of money. At 18 years old, that smell represented my future. I was a greenhorn in the oil patch, working a job called well testing. To a kid with no degree, $20 an hour felt like being an oil bear myself, especially when minimum wage was barely $6. But as the saying goes, there's no such thing as a free lunch. My tax for that paycheck came in the form of a man named Gary. Gary was a supervisor in his mid-50s, a man whose entire personality seemed to have been fermented in cheap whiskey and bitterness. He was the kind of person who wore his laziness like a badge of honor. He weighed about 260 pounds, most of it carried in a gut that strained against his fire-retardant coveralls, and he possessed a talent for avoiding physical labor that was almost Dean-level impressive. Our job was simple but grueling. Hook up high-pressure pipes to new wells and monitor the flow. It involved hauling 250-pound sections of iron. Gary would watch me struggle, leaning against the truck with a smirk, only stepping in when physics literally made it impossible for one human to move the weight. The rest of the time, he was in the heated shack, watching DVDs and napping while I stood out in the elements. But the physical laziness wasn't the problem. I could handle hard work. It was the jokes. "Hey, Einstein," he'd yell, loud enough for the other crews to hear. "You figured out which end of the wrench is which yet? Or do I need to draw a map for your baby face?" I'm 6 feet 1 inch. I wasn't small, but I lacked the callous soul required to fire back. I had a youthful face and a quiet disposition. Gary smelled that lack of confidence like a predator. He called me stupid daily. He mocked my lack of experience with power tools. The day the professional relationship died was when he asked, "Didn't your old man teach you how to use a drill?" I made the mistake of being honest. I told him my dad hadn't been around since I was a kid. I thought for a fleeting second that even a guy like Gary might have a shred of human empathy. I was wrong. The next time I fumbled a connection, Gary didn't just yell. He leaned in close, his breath smelling like stale cigarettes and morning after gin, and whispered, "No wonder your dad walked out on you. I'd leave too if I had a son this useless." The blood in my veins went cold. I called him out, my voice shaking. You know what he said? The universal mantra of the bully. "Jesus, kid, take a joke. You're too sensitive." That was the beginning of the end, because I realized then that Gary didn't just want a laborer. He wanted a punching bag, and he was getting paid $1 a kilometer to let me drive him to the site while he slept off his hangovers. He was getting rich off my silence. We were working deep in the boondocks, hours away from the nearest town. This meant long, dark drives in Gary's heavy-duty pickup. Every morning was the same. I'd climb into the driver's seat at 5 a.m., and Gary would climb into the passenger side, smelling like a distillery. Within 10 minutes, he'd be out, a gin-bloated corpse, as I like to call him, snoring so loudly it drowned out the radio. He was making a killing on the truck charge, the per-kilometer rate the company paid him for using his vehicle. I was getting minimum wage for travel time while doing 100% of the labor of driving. One night, at a greasy spoon in a tiny town, I tried to be reasonable. "Gary," I said, picking at my fries, "you're making $1,000 a week just on the mileage for this truck. I'm the one doing all the driving while you sleep. Maybe you could kick a little of that my way, just for the effort." The reaction was instantaneous. He didn't just say no, he went nuclear. He launched into a tirade that lasted the entire meal. He called me ungrateful. He called me a little bitch. He threatened my job, leaning over the table, spit flying. "You're lucky I let you sit in my truck, you pathetic loser," he hissed. "You want to complain? I'll have you replaced by Monday. There are 100 kids who'd kill for 20 an hour." I sat there, and for the first time in my life, the sadness was replaced by something else. A cold, hard clarity. I didn't say a word. I just got silent. That was my danger zone. When I stop talking, it means I've stopped caring about the consequences. That night, as I lay in my motel bed, I wasn't thinking about the money anymore. I was thinking about the fact that Gary's heart was probably held together by sheer spite and high blood pressure. I was thinking about how much he relied on that morning sleep to function. I was thinking about the Peterbilt. The next morning was gray and misty. Gary stumbled into the truck, cursed at me for looking at him funny, and was unconscious before we hit the highway. He was deep in it, that heavy, alcohol-induced REM sleep where the world around you ceases to exist. About 30 kilometers from the job site, I saw it. A massive semi-truck, a beautiful, chrome-heavy Peterbilt, was idling in a highway pullout. The driver was standing outside, stretching his legs, the diesel engine rumbling like a prehistoric beast. The plan materialized in my brain instantly. It was serendipity. It was fate. I pulled over quietly. Gary didn't even twitch. I hopped out and approached the trucker. He was a weather guy, probably wondering what this kid in oil-stained coveralls wanted. "Hey man," I said, leaning in, "I've got a boss in that truck who's been verbally abusing me for 3 months. He's asleep right now. If I pull my truck nose to nose with yours, would you mind hitting your air horn when I give you the signal?" The trucker looked at me, then looked at the sleeping Gary in the passenger seat. A slow, mischievous grin spread across his face. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and climbed back into his cab. I got back in Gary's truck. I moved slowly, precisely. I pulled the pickup around until our front bumper was inches away from the massive steel grille of the semi. To someone waking up, it would look like we were mid-head-on collision. I took a deep breath. This was it. I let out a blood-curdling scream. I didn't just yell. I shrieked like a man staring into the jaws of death. "Fuck, Gary, we're gonna die. Look out." I slammed my hands onto Gary's horn, a continuous, shrill blast. And then the trucker delivered. He didn't just tap the air horn. He laid into it. The sound was seismic. It was a physical force that shook the windows of the pickup. Gary didn't just wake up. He launched. He hit the ceiling of the truck cab, so hard I heard his head thud against the roof. His eyes were wider than I thought humanly possible. His hands flew up to protect his face from the impact. But the best part? The sound. It wasn't a man's scream. It was the sound of a person whose soul had briefly left their body and was trying to claw its way back in through his throat. And then the smell hit. Gary's gin-bloated digestive system, already under immense stress from his lifestyle, completely gave up the ghost. He didn't just have an accident. He committed a biological crime in those tan leather seats. The silence that followed the honking was deafening. I didn't wait. I threw the truck into reverse, peeled out with a spray of gravel, and gave the trucker a frantic, grateful wave. He was probably laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. Gary was hyperventilating. He was a shade of purple I'd only seen on certain types of fruit. "I have high blood pressure," he managed to choke out, his voice several octaves higher than usual. "You could have killed me. I could have had a stroke." I looked at him, and the laughter started. It was an ugly, hysterical, hyena-like laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from 3 months of repressed rage. "Oh, come on, Gary," I gasped, wiping tears from my eyes. "Can't you take a joke? You're too sensitive." He tried to threaten me. He tried to tell me I was dead meat. But it's hard to be intimidating when you've clearly and visibly soiled yourself in a company vehicle. Every time he opened his mouth to bark an insult, I just laughed harder. Is it your normal shade of red, Gary? You look a little flushed. When we finally got to the site, he didn't even get out to work. He stomped toward the shack, his gait awkward for obvious reasons, and screamed that I was fired. He called the general manager immediately, claiming attempted murder. I just sat on the bumper of the truck, lit a cigarette, and enjoyed the freshest air I'd breathed in months. For hours later, the GM arrived to pick me up. He was a decent guy who had seen a dozen Garys come and go. On the drive back to the city, I told him everything. The jokes about my dad, the laziness, the drinking, and finally, the great Peterbilt incident. The GM tried to stay professional. He really did. But by the time I got to the part where Gary hit the ceiling, he was wheezing behind the steering wheel. I didn't lose my job. I got moved to a different crew, one where I was respected and worked with actual professionals. Gary stayed on his crew, but word got out. In the oil patch, stories like that travel faster than a wildfire. He became the guy who shit himself because of a horn. His tough guy persona was gone forever. Looking back as a former paramedic, yeah, I probably did spike his blood pressure to dangerous levels. But sometimes, a heart needs a little shock to remember how to be human. Or at least, to remember that the kid you're bullying might just have a trucker for an accomplice. Have you ever had a bully who thought they were untouchable? How did you take them down? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of sweet, sweet vindication. I'll see you in the next one.